Once upon a time there was a handsome prince who grew up in a palace. He was then second in line to the throne after his older brother. Many young girls dreamed of one day perhaps marrying him. As a young man, the dashing prince gained the nickname Randy Andy. He fell in love with an American actress and photographer called Stark. But this love affair was broken up by the Queen, as Miss Stark was presumably not quite suitable to be a royal consort. The prince gained in public respect by risking his life fighting for his country during the Falklands War, and he finally married Sarah Ferguson, of a rather better English social class than his earlier love. But sadly, his wife found his long absences on military service too difficult and did the then unthinkable for a royal. She started an affair with someone else. So they had to divorce, although they apparently remained very good friends, and they still live in the same house together even today. One of Prince Andrew's friends from his time at university was Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of the late Robert Maxwell, a self-made financier and also fraudster. She later introduced the prince to her boyfriend, Jeffrey Epstein. And through these two, Prince Andrew apparently met Victoria Roberts, then 17 and one of many young female teenagers that Mr. Epstein apparently liked to have around him to give him massages and then pass on to his friends. Indeed, there is a now infamous photograph of the prince with his arm around this young lady's waist with Ghislaine Maxwell in the background. While of course there is a legal concept of innocent until or unless proved guilty in a court of law, Virginia Roberts, now Giuffre, claims she had sex with the prince on several occasions because she was told to by Epstein and Maxwell. And another young woman has now just claimed that she too had sex with Prince Andrew, also apparently as one of Jeffrey Epstein's many sex slaves. And while Prince Andrew's privileged position may have protected him while he was allegedly doing things that royal family members are not supposed to be doing, any future life for him out in society, let alone representing the monarch, is now highly unlikely. After his disastrous 2019 interview and just recently the guilty verdict for 5 out of 6 counts for Ghislaine Maxwell, even if he escapes the possibility of any real legal consequences of these allegations against him, Prince Andrew is still likely not only to lose out financially — he's already sold his $32 million Swiss chalet to cover legal fees, which the Queen will not help him with — but his reputation and that of the royal family has already been considerably damaged by his apparent past behaviour. So, if even the highest born of the land can allegedly be involved in abusing underage girls and a financial remedy sought by an alleged victim, surely those lower down the scale socially who are also accused of abusing underage girls should be dealt with appropriately and legally. Well, perhaps sometimes. Let us turn to our other story, also about underage sexual abuse, but here the victims run to many thousands, probably hundreds of thousands by now, of young and vulnerable teenage British children, some even as young as 12, who have been systematically abused and raped by so-called grooming gangs of men, the large majority of whom are Muslims. This inconvenient statistic has meant that many police and other people in authority with a duty of care when desperate victims sought justice for the horrors they'd been subjected to, put their own fears of being falsely accused of being racists above the legitimate needs of so many victims of such appalling crimes. And the then Prime Minister Gordon Brown in 2008 is reported as having done a deal for Saudi money, which meant that police were instructed to turn a blind eye to such damaging violence against so many British children. The young victims were usually from families with problems and often from the lowest social strata. When you haven't felt loved and supported in a stable situation by your own family, that can make you very vulnerable to grooming by an abuser because you're desperately in need of love and being made to feel significant. Ultimately, you are damaged far, far more and way beyond most people's comprehension once the abuse kicks in. Children have been systematically raped by many men in British towns like Birmingham, Rotherham and Telford, and sadly various others. All the victims were non-Muslims, most were white, but included Sikh and Hindu girls as well, and the vast majority of the perpetrators were Muslims. Why? Well, perhaps most shocking is the tragic fact that mainstream Islam actually permits Muslim men to take non-Muslim sex slaves, those whom their right hand possesses, referred to in various verses of the Quran, such as 424, 436, 3352, and several others. That's why ISIS fighters as fundamentalist Muslims, following all the tenets of their religious commandments seriously, took sex slaves, notably from the Yazidi people, and that is why Muslim men in these British rape gangs presumably felt they were entitled by their religion to do the same to their own non-Muslim victims in vicious gang rapes and other abuses. And some of their victims were described as being called white trash. Indeed, as an article about these horrific attacks against the most vulnerable members of British society, children, from only a year ago points out, sexual slavery has historically been used as a religious weapon to advance the domination of Islam. Of course, this is all dynamite to the politically correct nonsense that all religions are essentially the same in what they teach and that only white people can apparently be racists. And current hate crime legislation can and has been used to protect perpetrators of these utterly evil crimes against vulnerable children from admitting the real impact of such bigoted, misogynistic and vile attitudes towards non-Muslims found tragically within the pages of the Quran itself. While some perpetrators have finally been sent to prison, many others have not, and notoriously a blind eye was turned to the immense suffering of British children for many years by most of the establishment. And the suffering continues. When Tommy Robinson attempted to help the disabled mother of one of the many grooming gang victims whose home in Telford was being attacked the other day because her daughter had spoken out about her abuse, the police apparently refused to help. Fortunately, Tommy Robinson, who was paid a very high price over a number of years for daring to speak out against the darker side of Islamic ideology and for seeking to protect vulnerable children from abuse, gathered both money and physical help from other people to relocate this family who were being terrorized because they dared to speak out openly against the immense harm done by gang rape and abuse to one of so many young survivors. Tommy Robinson's documentary, The Rape of Britain, is slated to be publicly screened in Telford on the 29th of January this year, and that will probably cause quite a storm. According to Tommy Robinson, outrageously, he's now included in a list of the top 20 terrorists in the world, when as a British patriot with centralist and most definitely not any kind of far-right politics, terrorism is surely the very last thing he would ever support. So, while Prince Andrew stands to lose considerably if a civil case in New York against him is found in his accuser Virginia Giuffre's favour, though he's not going to end up in a jail cell like Ghislaine Maxwell, at least the depth of damage and suffering to Jeffrey Epstein's many victims is at long last being acknowledged publicly. Yet, in the world of politically correct nonsense, we have taken many strides backwards in Britain and some other European countries in protecting the rights of women and especially young girls to live openly and freely as they choose, and to expect to receive proper support, protection and justice if they are raped and abused. As lower class and mostly white child victims of ethnic minority men, many have been fed to the wolves and their lives destroyed for many years to enable the tragic and evil lie of multicultural and religious relativism to continue. Thank you so much for listening.